Moonfleet by J. Meade Faulkner, published in 1898. We thought there was no more behind, but such a day tomorrow as today, and to be a boy eternal. Shakespeare. Says the captain to the crew, we have slipped the revenue. I can see the cliffs of Dover on the lee. Tip the signal to the Swan, and anchor broadside on. And out with the kegs of eau-de-vie, says the captain, out with the kegs of eau-de-vie. Says the lander to his men, get your grommets on the pin. There's a blue light burning out at sea. The windward anchors creep, and the gorge is fast asleep. And the keys are bobbing 1, 2, 3, says the lander. The kegs are bobbing 1, 2, 3. But the bold preventive man primes the powder in his pan, and cries to the posse, follow me. We'll take the smuggling gang, and those that fight shall hang. Dingle dangle from the execution tree, says the gouger. Dingle dangle the weary moon to see. Chapter 1. In Moonfleet village. So sleeps the pride of former days. More. The village of Moonfleet lies half a mile from the sea, on the right or west bank of the Fleet stream. This rivulet, which is so narrow as it passes the houses, I have known a good jumper to clear it, without a pole, broadens out into salt marshes below the village, and loses itself at last in a lake of brackish water. The lake is good for nothing except seafowl, herons, and oysters, and forms such a place as they call in the Indies a lagoon, being shut off from the open channel by a monstrous great beach or dyke of pebbles, of which I shall speak more hereafter. When I was a child, I thought this place was called Moonfleet, because on a still night, whether in summer or a winter frost, the moon shone very brightly on the lagoon, but learned afterwards that 'twas but one short for Moonfleet, from the Mohuns, a great family who were once lords of all of these parts. My name is John Trenchard, and I was 15 years of age when the story begins. My mother and father had both been dead for years, and I boarded with my aunt, Miss Arnold, who was kind to me in her own fashion, but too strict and precise to ever make me love her. I shall first speak of one evening in the fall of the year 1757. It must have been late in October, though I have forgotten the exact date, and I sat in a little front parlour reading after tea. My aunt had few books, a Bible, a Common Prayer, and some volumes of sermons are all I can recollect now, but the Reverend Mr. Glennie, who taught us village children, had lent me a story-book, full of interest and adventure, called The Arabian Nights Entertainment. At last the light began to fail, and I was nothing loath to leave off reading for several reasons. As first, the parlour was a chilly room with horsehair chairs and sofa, and only a coloured paper screen in the grate, for my aunt did not allow a fire until the 1st of November. Second, there was a rank smell of molten tallow in the house, for my aunt was dipping winter candles in the frames in the back kitchen. Third, I had reached a part in the Arabian Nights, which tightened my breath and made me wish to leave off reading for the very anxiousness of expectation. It was that point in the story of the wonderful lamp, where the false uncle lets fall a stone that seals the mouth of the underground chamber, and immures the boy Aladdin in the darkness, because he would not give up the lamp till he stood safe on the surface again. This scene reminded me of one of those dreadful nightmares where we dream we are shut in a little room, the walls of which are closing in upon us, and so impressed me that the memory of it served as a warning in an adventure that befell me later on. So I gave up reading and stepped out onto the street. It was a poor street at best, though once, no doubt, it had been finer. Now there were not 200 souls in Moonfleet, and yet the houses that held them straggled sadly over half a mile, lying at intervals along either side of the road. Nothing was ever made new in the village. If houses wanted repair badly, it was pulled down, and so there were toothless gaps in the street, and overrun gardens with broken down walls, and many of the houses that not yet looked as though they could stand but a little longer. The sun had set. Indeed, it was already so dusk that the lower or sea end of the street was lost from sight. There was a little fog or smoke wreath in the air, with an odour of burning weeds, and that first frosty feeling of the autumn that makes us think of glowing fires and the comfort of long winter evenings to come. All was very still, but I could hear the tapping of a hammer further down the street, and walked to see what was doing, for we had no trades in Moonfleet save that of fishing. It was Ratsey, the sexton, at work in the shed, which opened on the street, lettering a tombstone with a mullet engraver. He had been a mason before he became fisherman, and was handy with his tools, so that if anybody wanted a headstone set up in their churchyard, he went to Ratsey to get it done. I leant over the half-door and watched him a minute, chipping away with the graver and the bad light from the lantern. Then he looked up and seeing me said, "Here, John, if you have nothing to do, come in and hold the lantern for me. 'Tis but a half-hour's job to get this all finished." Ratsey was always kind to me, and had lent me a chisel many a time to go and make boats, so I stepped in and held the lantern, watching him chink out the bits of Portland stone with the graver, and blinking a while when they came too near my eyes. The inscription stood complete, but he was putting the finishing touches to a little sea-piece carved at the top of the stone, which showed a schooner boarding a cutter. I thought it was fine work at the time, but I now know that it was rough enough. Indeed, you may see it for yourself in Moonfleet churchyard to this day, and read the inscription too, though it is yellow with lichen, and not so plain as it was that night. This is how it runs: "Sacred to the memory of David Block, aged 15, who was killed by a shot fired from the Elector schooner, 21st of June, 1757. Of life bereft by foul design, I mingle with my fellow clay. On God's protection I recline, to save me in the judgment day. Thereto must you, cruel man, appear. Repent ere it be all too late, or else a dreadful sentence fear, for God will surely revenge my fate." The Reverend Mr. Glennie wrote in the verses, and I knew them by heart, for he had given me a copy. Indeed, the whole village had rung with the tale of David's death, and it was yet in every mouth. He was the only child to Elzevir Block, who kept the Why Not Inn at the bottom of the village, and was with the contrabandiers when their ketch was boarded at that June night by the government schooner. People said it was Magistrate Maskew of Moonfleet Manor who had put the revenue man on the track, and anyway he was on board the Elector as she overhauled the ketch. There was some show of fighting when the vessels first came alongside of one another, and the Maskew drew a pistol and fired it off in young David's face, with only 2 gunwales between them. In the afternoon of Midsummer's Day, the Elector brought the ketch into Moonfleet, and there was a posse of constables to march the smugglers off to Dorchester jail. The prisoners trudged up through the village, ironed 2 and 2 together, while people stood at their doors or followed them, the men greeting them with a kindly word, for we knew most of them as Ringstave and Monkbury men, and the women sorrowing for their wives. But they left David's body in the ketch, so the boy paid dear for his night's frolic. "Aye, 'twas a cruel, cruel thing to fire on so young a lad," Ratsey said as he stepped back a pace to study the effect of a flag that he was chiselling on the revenue schooner. "And the trouble is likely to come to the other poor fellows taken, for Lawyer Empson says 3 of them will surely hang at next disease, I recollect," he went on. "30 years ago, when there was a bit of a scuffle between the Royal Sophie and the Marnhull, they hanged 4 of the contrabandiers, and my old father caught his death of cold, what with going to see the poor chaps turned off at Dorchester, and standing up to his knees in the River From to get a sight of them, for all the countryside was there, and such a press there was no place on land. There, that's enough," he said, turning again to the gravestone. "On Monday I'll line the ports in black, and get a brush of red to pick out the flag. And now, my son, you've helped with the lantern, so come down to the Why Not, and I'll have a word with Elzevir, who sadly needs a talk of kindly friends to cheer him, and we'll find you a glass of Hollands to keep out the autumn chills." I was but a lad, and thought it a vast honour to be asked to the Why Not, for did not such an invitation raise me at once to the dignity of manhood? Ah, sweet boyhood, how eager are we as boys to be quit of thee! With what regret do we look on thee before our man's race is halfway run! Yet was not my pleasure without alloy, for I feared to even think of what Aunt Jane would say if she knew that I had been at the Why Not, and beside that, I stood in awe of grim old Elzevir Block, grimmer and sadder 1,000 times since David's death. The Why Not was not the real name of the inn, it was properly the Mahoon Arms. The Mahoons had once owned, as I have said, the whole of the village, but their fortunes fell, and with them fell the fortunes of Moonfleet. The ruins of their mansion showed grey on the hillside above the village. Their almshouses stood halfway down the street, with the quadrangle deserted and overgrown. The Mahoon image and superscription was on everything from the church to the inn, and everything that bore it was stamped also with the superscription of decay. And here it is necessary that I say a few words as to this family badge, for as sure as you will see, I was to bear it all my life, and shall carry its impress to me to my grave. The Mahoon shield was plain white or silver, and bore nothing on it except a great black Y. I call it a Y, though the Reverend Mr. Glennie once explained to me that it was not a Y at all, but what the heralds called a cross-pull. Cross-pull or no cross-pull, it looked all the world like a black Y, with broad arm ending in each of the top corners of the shield, and the tail coming down into the bottom. You might see the cognizance carved on the manor, and on the stonework and woodwork of the church, and on a score of houses in the village, and it hang up on the signboard over the door of the inn. Everyone knew the Mahoon Y for miles around, and a former landlord having called the inn the Why Not in jest, the name has stuck to it ever since. More than once on winter evenings, when men were drinking in the Why Not, I had stood outside and listened to them singing Ducky Stones or Kegs Bobbing 1, 2, 3, or some of the other tunes that sailors sang in the West. Such songs had neither beginnings nor endings, and very little sense to catch hold of in the middle. One man would croon the air, and the others would croon a solemn chorus, but there was little hard drinking, for Elzevir Block never got drunk himself, and did not like his guests to get drunk either. On singing nights the room grew hot, and the steam stood so thick on the glass inside that one could not see in, but at other times when there was no company, I have peeped through the red curtains and watched Elzevir Block and Ratsey playing backgammon at the trestle table by the fire. It was on the trestle table that Block had afterwards laid out his son's dead body, and some said they had looked through the window at night and seen the father trying to wash the blood matting out of the boy's yellow hair, and heard him groaning and talking to the lifeless clay, as if it could understand. Anyhow, there had been little drinking in the inn since that time, for Block grew more and more silent and morose. He had never courted customers, and now he scowled on any that came, so the men looked on the Why Not as a blighted spot, and went to drink at the Three Chuffs at Ringstove. My heart was in my mouth when Ratsey lifted the latch and led me into the inn parlour. It was a low sanded room, with no light except a fire of seawood on the hearth, burning clear and lambent with blue salt flames. There were tables at each end of the room, and wooden seated chairs round the walls, and at the trestle table by the chimney sat Elzevir Block, smoking a long pipe and looking at the fire. He was a man of 50, with a shock of grizzled hair, a broad but not unkindly face of regular features, bushy eyebrows, and the finest forehead that I had ever seen. His frame was thick-set and still immensely strong. Indeed, the countryside was full of tales that his strange prowess or endurance. Blocks had been landlords at the Why Not, father and son, for years, but Elzevir's mother came from the Low Countries, and that was how he got his outland name, and could speak Dutch. Few men knew much of him, and folks often wondered how it was he kept the Why Not on, so little custom as went that way. Yet he never seemed to lack for money, and people loved to tell stories of his strength, They would speak also of widows helped and sick comforted with unknown gifts, and a hint that some of them came from Elzevir Block, for all he was so grim and silent. He turned round and got up as we came in. My fears led me to think that his face darkened when he saw me. "What does the boy want?" he said to Ratsey sharply. "He wants the same as I want, and that's a glass of Ararat milk to keep out the autumn chills," the sexton answered, drawing up another chair to the trestle table. "Cow's milk is best for children such as he," was Elzevir's answer, as he took 2 shining brass candlesticks from the mantel board, set them on the table, and lit the candles with burning chip from the hearth. "John is no child. He is the same age as David, and comes from helping me to finish David's headstone. 'Tis finished now, barring the paint upon the ships, and please God, by Monday night we will have set fair and square in this churchyard, and then the poor lad may rest in peace, knowing he has above him Master Ratsey's best handwork, and the parson's verses to set forth how shamefully he came to his end." I thought that Elzevir softened a little as Ratsey spoke of his son, and he said, "Ay, David rests in peace. 'Tis that they brought him to his end, that shall not rest in peace when their time comes, and may it come sooner than they think," he added, speaking more to himself than to us. I knew that he meant Mr. Maskew, and recollected that some had warned the magistrate that he had better keep out of Elzevir's way, for there was no knowing what a desperate man might do, and yet the two had met since in the village street, and nothing was come of it than a scowling look from Block. "Tosh, man," broke in the sexton, "it was the foulest deed ever man did, but let not thy mind brood on it, nor think how thou mayest get thyself avenged. Leave that to Providence, for he whose wisdom lets such things be done will surely see they met their due reward. Vengeance is mine, and I will repay, said the Lord." And he took his hat off and hung it on a peg. Block did not answer, but set 3 glasses on the table, and then took out from a cupboard a little round long-necked bottle, from which he poured out a glass for Ratsey and himself. Then he half filled the third and pushed it along the table to me, saying, "There, take it, lad. If thou wilt, 'twill do thee no good, but may do thee no harm." Ratsey raised his glass almost before it was filled. He sniffed the liquor and smacked his lips. "O rare milk of Ararat," he said. "It is sweet and strong and sets the heart at ease. And now get the backgammon board, John, and set it for us on the table." So they fell to the game, and I took a sly sip of the liquor, but nearly choked myself, not being used to the strong waters, and finding it heady and burning in my throat. Neither man spoke, and there was no sound except the constant rattle of the dice, and the rubbing of the pieces being moved on across the board. Now and then one of the players stopped to light his pipe, and at the end of the game they scored their totals on the table with a bit of chalk. So I watched them for an hour, knowing the game myself, and being interested at seeing Elzevir's backgammon board, which I had heard talked of before. It had seemed part of the furniture of the Why Not for generations of landlords, and served perhaps pastime for the cavaliers of the civil wars. All was of oak, black and polished, board, dice boxes, and men, but round the edge ran a Latin inscription inlaid in light wood, which I read on that first evening, but did not understand till Mr. Glennie translated it to me. I had cause to remember it afterwards, so I shall set it down here in Latin for those who know the tongue. Et in vita un in luso, alle pessima jactura arte corriginda est, and in English, as Mr. Glennie translated it, "As in life, so in a game of hazard, skill will make something of the worst of throws." At last Elzevir looked up and spoke to me, not unkindly. "Lad, it is time for you to go home, and say that Blackbird walks on the first nights of winter, and some have met him face to face betwixt this house and yours." I saw he wanted to be rid of me, so I bade them both good night and was off home, running all the way thither. though not from any fear of Blackbeard, for Ratsey had often told me there was no chance of meeting him, unless one passed the churchyard by night. Blackbeard was one of the Mahoons who had died a century back, and was buried in the vault under the church with the others of his family, but could not rest there, whether as some said because he was always looking for a lost treasure, or as others because of his exceeding wickedness in life. If this last were the true reason, he must have been bad indeed, for Mahoons have died and since his day wicked enough to bear anyone's company in their vault or elsewhere. Men would have it that on their dark winter nights Blackbeard might be seen in an old-fashioned lanthorn, digging for treasure in the graveyard, and those who had professed to know said he was the tallest of men, with a full black beard, coppery face, and such evil eyes that any who met their gaze must die within a year. However that might be, there were few in Moonfleet who would not rather walk 10 miles round than go near the churchyard after dark, and once when Cracky Jones, a poor doited body, was found there one summer morning, lying dead on the grass, it was thought that he had met Blackbeard in the night. Mr. Glennie, who knew more about such things than anyone else, told me that Blackbeard was none other than a certain Colonel John Mahoon, deceased about 100 years ago. He would have it that Colonel Mahoon, in the dreadful wars against King Charles I, had deserted the allegiance of his house, and supported the cause of the rebels. So being made governor of Carisbrooke Castle for the Parliament, he became there the King's gaoler, but was false to his trust, for the King, carrying constantly hidden about his person a great diamond which had once been given to him by his brother the King of France, Mahoon got wind of this jewel, and promised that if it were given him, he would wink at his Majesty's escape. Then this wicked man, having taken the bribe, plays traitor again, comes with a file of soldiers at the hour appointed for the King's flight, finds his Majesty escaping through a window, has him away to a stricter ward, and reports to the Parliament that the King's escape is only prevented by Colonel Mahoon's watchfulness. But how true, as Mr. Glennie said, that we should not be envious against the ungodly, against the man that walketh after evil counsels. Suspicion fell on Colonel Mahoon. He was removed from his governorship, and came back to his home at Moonfleet. There he lived in seclusion, despised by both parties in the state, until he died, about the time of the happy restoration of King Charles II. But even after his death he could not get rest, for men said that he had hid somewhere that treasure given to him to permit the King's escape, and that not daring to reclaim it, had let the secret die with him, and so must needs come out of his grave to try and get it again. Mr. Glennie would never say whether he believes the tale or not, pointing out that apparitions of both good and evil spirits are related in the Holy Scripture, but that the churchyard was an unlikely spot for Colonel Mahoon to seek his treasure in, for had it been buried there, he would have had 100 chances to have it up in his lifetime. However this may be, though I was brave as a lion by day, and used indeed to frequent the churchyard, because there was the widest view of the sea to be attained from it, yet no reward would have taken me thither at night, nor was I myself without some witness to the tale, for having to walk to Ringstave for Dr. Hawkins on the night my aunt broke her leg, I took the path along the down which overlooks the churchyard at a mile off, and thence most certainly saw a light moving to and fro about the church, where no honest man could be at 2 o'clock in the morning. Chapter 2. The Floods. Then the banks came down with ruin and rout, then beaten spray flew around about, then all the mighty floods were out, and all the world was in the sea. Jean Ingelow. On the 3rd of November, a few days after this visit to the Why Not, the wind, which had been blowing from the south-west, began about 4 in the afternoon to rise in sudden strong gusts. The rooks had been pitch-falling all the morning, so we knew that bad weather was due, and when we came out from the schooling that Mr. Glennie gave us in the hall of the old almshouses, there were wisps of thatch and even stray tiles flying from the roofs, and the children sang, Blow wind, rise storm, ships ashore before morn. It is heathenish rhyme that has come down out of other and worse times, for though I do not say but that a wreck in Moonfleet beach was looked upon sometimes as a little short of a godsend, yet I hope none of us were so wicked as to wish the vessel to be wrecked, so that we might share in the plunder. Indeed, I have known the men of Moonfleet risk their own lives 100 times over to save those of shipwrecked mariners, as when the Darius, East Indiaman, came ashore, nay, even poor nameless corpses washed up were sure of Christian burial, or perhaps one of Master Ratsey's headstones to set forth sex and date, as may be seen in the churchyard to this day. Our village lies near the centre of Moonfleet Bay, a great bight 20 miles across, and a death trap to up-channel sailors in a southwesterly gale, for with that wind blowing strong from the south, if you cannot double the snout, you must most surely come ashore, with many a good ship failing to round that point has beat up and down the bay all day, but come out to beach in the evening, and once on the beach the sea has little mercy, for the water is deep right in, and the waves curl over the full of the pebbles with a weight no timbers can withstand. Then if poor fellows try to save themselves, there is a deadly undertow or rushback in the waters, which sucks them off their legs, and carries them under again the thundering waves. It is that back-suck of the pebbles that you may hear for miles inland, even at Dorchester, on still nights long after the wind that has caused it have sunk, and which makes people turn in their beds and thank God that they are not fighting with the sea on Moonfleet Beach. But on this 3rd of November there was no wreck, only such a wind as I have never known before, and only once since. All night long the tempest grew fiercer. I think no one in Moonfleet went to bed, for there was a breaking of tiles and glass, such a banging of doon and rattling of shutters, that no sleep was possible, and we were afraid besides lest the chimney should fall and crush us. The wind blew fiercest about 5 in the morning, and then some ran up the street calling out a new danger, that the sea was breaking over the beach, and that all the place was like to be flooded. Some of the women were for flitting forthwith and climbing down, but Master Ratsey, who was going round with others to comfort people, soon showed us that the upper part of the village stood so high that if the water was to get thither, there was no knowing if it would not cover Ridgetown itself. But what with its being a spring tide and the sea breaking clean over the great outer beach of pebbles, a thing that had not happened for 50 years, there was so much water piled up in the lagoon that it passed its bounds and flooded all the sea meadows, and even the lower end of the street. So, when the day broke, there was the churchyard flooded, though it was on rising ground, and the church itself standing up like a steep little island, and the water over the doorsill of the Why Not, though Elzevir Block would not budge, saying he did not care if the sea swept him away. It was but a 9 hours' wonder, for the wind fell very suddenly and the water began to go back. The sun shone bright, and before noon people came out to the doors to see the floods and talk over the storm. Most said that it had never been so fierce a wind, but some of the old spoke of one in the 2nd year of Queen Anne, and would have it as bad or worse. But whether worse or not, the storm was a weighty matter enough for me, and turned the course of my life, as ye shall hear. I have said that the waters came up so high that the church stood out like an island, but they went back quickly, and Mr. Glennie was able to hold service on the next Sunday morning. Few enough folks came to Moonfleet Church at any time, but fewer still came that morning, for the meadows between the village and the churchyard were wet and miry from the water. There were streamers of seaweed tackled about the very tombstones, and against the outside of the churchyard wall was piled up a great bank of it, from which came a salt rancid smell like a guillemot's egg, that is always in the air after a southwesterly gale has strewn the shore with that wrack. The church is as large as any other I have seen, and divided into two parts, with a stone screen across the middle. Perhaps Moonfleet was once a large place, and then likely enough there were people to fill such a church, but never since I knew it did anyone worship in that part called the nave. This western portion was quite empty beyond a few old tombs and the royal arms of Queen Anne. The pavement too was damp and mossy, and there were green patches down the white walls where the rains had gotten in. So the handful of people that had come to church were glad enough to get to the other side of the screen in the chancel, where at least the pew floors were boarded over, and the panelling of oak work kept off the draughts. Now this Sunday morning there were only 3 or 4, I think, beside Mr. Glennie and Ratsey, and the half-dozen of us boys who crossed the swampy meadow strewn with drowned shrew mice and moles. Even my aunt was not at church, being prevented by a migraine, but a surprise waited those who did go, for there in a pew by himself sat Elzevir Block. The people stared at him as they came in, for no one had ever known him to go to church before, some saying in the village that he was a Catholic, and others an infidel. Whoever that may be, there he was this day, wishing perhaps to show a favour to the parson who had written the verses for David's headstone. He took no notice of anyone, nor exchanged greetings with those that came in, as was the fashion in Moonfleet Church, but kept his eyes fixed on a prayer book, with which he held in his hand, though he could not be following the minister, for he never turned the leaf. The church was so damp from the floods that Mr. Ratsey had put a fire in the brazier, which stood at the back, but was not commonly lighted till the winter had fairly begun. We boys stood as close to the brazier as we could, for the wet cold struck up from the flagstones, and besides that we were so far from the clergyman, and so well screened by the oak backs, that we could bake an apple or roast a chestnut without much fear of being caught. But that morning there was something else to take off our thoughts, for before the service was well begun we became aware of a strange noise under the church. For the first time it came was just as Mr. Glennie was finishing Dearly Beloved, and we heard it again before the second lesson. It was not a loud noise, but rather like that on which a boat makes jostling against another at sea, only there was something deeper and more hollow about it. We boys looked at each other, for we knew what was under the church, and the sound could only come from the Mohune vault. No one at Moonfleet had ever seen the inside of that vault, but Ratsey was told by his father, who was clerk before him, that it underlay half the chancel, and that there were more than a score of Mohunes lying there. It had not been opened for over 40 years, since Gerard Mohune, who burst a blood vessel drinking at Weymouth races, was buried there. But there was a tale that one Sunday afternoon, many years back, there had come from the vault so horrible and unearthly a cry that parson and people got up and fled from the church, and would not worship there for weeks afterwards. We thought of these stories and huddled up closer to the brazier, being frightened at the noise, and uncertain whether we should not turn tail and run from the church, for it was certain that something was moving in the Mohune vault, to which there was no entrance except by a ringed stone in the chancel floor that had not been lifted for 40 years. However, we thought better of it, and did not budge, though I could see, when standing up and looking over the tops of the seats, that others besides ourselves were ill at ease, for Granny Tucker gave such starts when she heard the sounds, that twice her spectacles fell off her nose into her lap, and Mr. Ratsey seemed to be trying to mask one noise by making himself another, whether by shuffling with his feet or by thumping down his prayer book. But the thing that most surprised me was that Elzevir Block, who cared, men said, neither for God nor devil, looked unquiet, and gave quick glances at Ratsey every time the sound came. So we sat till Mr. Glennie was well on with the sermon. His discourse interested me, though I was only a boy, for he likened life to the letter Y, saying that in each man's life must come a point where two roads part like the arms of a Y, and that everyone must choose for himself whether he will follow the broad and sloping path on the left, or the steep and narrow path on the right, "For," said he, "if you will look in your books, you will see that the letter Y is not like the Mahoons with both arms equal. It has the arm on the left broader and more sloping than the arm on the right. Hence ancient philosophers hold that the arm on the left represents the easy downward road to destruction, and the arm on the right the narrow upward path of life." When we heard that, we all fell to searching our prayer books for a capital Y, and Granny Tucker, who knew not A from B, made much ado in fumbling with her book, for she would have people think that she could read. Then, just at that moment, came a noise from below louder than those before, hollow and grating like the cry of an old man in pain. With that, up jumps Granny Tucker, calling out loud in church to Mr. Glennie, "Oh, master, however can he bide their preaching, when the moons be rising from their graves?" And out from the church. That was too much from the others, and all fled, Mrs. Vining crying, "Lord sakes, we shall all be throttled like Cracky Jones." So in a minute there were none left in the church, save and except Mr. Glennie, with me, Ratsey, and Elzevir Block. I did not run, first not wishing to show myself coward before the men, second because I thought if Blackbeard came he would fall on the men rather than on a boy, and third that if it came to blows, Block was strong enough to give account even of a Mahoon. Mr. Glennie went on with his sermon, making as though he had neither heard any noise nor saw the people leave the church, and when he had finished, Elzevir walked out, but I stopped to see what the minister would say to Ratsey about the noise in the vault. The sexton helped Mr. Glennie off with his gown, and then seeing me standing by and listening, said, "The Lord has set evil angels among us. 'Tis a terrible thing, Master Glennie, to hear the dead man moving beneath our feet." "Tut, tut," answered the minister. "It is only their own fears that make such noises terrible to the vulgar. As for Blackbeard, I am not here to say whether guilty spirits sometimes cannot rest, and are seen wandering by men. But for these noises, they are certainly nature's work, as is the noises of waves on the beach. These floods have filled the vaults with water, and so the coffins, getting afloat, move in some eddies that we know not of, and jostle one another. Then, being hollow, they give forth these sounds you hear, and these are your evil angels. 'Tis very true the dead do move beneath our feet, but 'tis because they cannot help themselves, being carried hither and thither by the water. Fie, Ratsey, man, you should know better than to fright a boy with silly talk of spirits when the truth is bad enough." The parson's words had the ring of truth in them to me, and I never doubted that he was right. So this mystery was explained, and yet it was a dreadful thing that made me shiver. To think of the Mahoons all adrift in their coffins, and jostling one another in the dark. I pictured them to myself, the many generations, old men and children, man and maid, all bones now, each afloat in his little box of rotting wood, and Blackbeard himself in a great coffin bigger than all the rest, coming crashing into the weaker ones, as a ship in a heavy sea comes crashing down sometimes, in the trough, on a small boat that is trying to board her. And then there was the outer darkness of the vault itself to think of, and the close air, and the black putrid water nearly up to the roof on which such sorry ships were sailing. Ratsey looked a little crestfallen at what Mr. Glennie said, but put a good face on it and answered, "Well, master, I am but a plain man, and know nothing about floods and these eddies and hidden workings of nature, of which you speak. But, saving your presence, I hold it a fond thing to make light of such warnings that are given us. 'Tis always said, when moons move, then Moonfleet mourns, and I have heard my father tell that the last time they stirred was in Queen Anne's second year, when the great storm blew men's homes about their heads. And as for the frightening children, 'tis well that heady boys should learn to stand in awe, and not pry into what does not concern them, or may come to harm." He added the last words with what I felt sure was a nod of warning to myself, though I did not understand what he meant. So he walked off in a huff with Elzevir, who was waiting for him outside, and I went with Mr. Glennie and carried his gown for him back to his lodging in the village. Mr. Glennie was always very friendly, making much of me, and talking to me as if I were his equal, which was due, I think, to there being no one of his own knowledge in the neighbourhood, and so he had as like talk to an ignorant boy as to an ignorant man. After we had passed the churchyard turnstile, and were crossing one of the sludgy meadows, I asked him again what he knew of Blackbeard and his lost treasure. "My son," he answered, "all that I have been able to gather is that this Colonel John Mohune, foolishly called Blackbeard, was the first to impair the family fortunes by his excesses, and even let the almshouses fall to ruin, and turn the poor away. Unless report strangely belies him, he was an evil man, and besides numberless lesser crimes, he had on his hands the blood of a faithful servant, whom he made away with because chance had brought to the man's ears some guilty secret of the master. Then at the end of his life, being filled with fear and remorse, as must always happen with evil livers at last, he sent for Rector Kindersley of Dorchester to confess him, though a Protestant, and wished to make amends by leaving that treasure so ill-gotten from King Charles, which was all that he had to leave, for the repair and support of the almshouses. He made a last will, which I have seen, to this effect, but without describing the treasure further than to call it a diamond, nor saying where it was to be found. Doubtless he meant to get it himself, sell it, and afterwards apply the profit to his good purpose. But before he could do so, death called him suddenly to his account. Some men say that he cannot rest in his grave, not having made even so tardy a reparation, and never will rest unless the treasure is found and spent upon the poor." I thought much over what Mr. Glennie had said, and fell to wondering where Blackbeard could have hid his diamond, and whether I might not find it some day and make myself a rich man. Now as I considered that noise we heard under the church, and passing Glennie's explanation of it, I was more and more perplexed, for the noise had, as I have said, something deep and hollow booming in it, and how was that to be made by decayed coffins? I had more than once seen Ratsey, in digging a grave, turn up pieces of coffins, and sometimes a tarnished nameplate would show that they had not been so very long underground, and yet the wood was quite decayed and rotten. And granting that such were in the earth, and so might more easily perish, yet when the top was shaken off, old Guy's brick grave to put his widow beside him, Mr. Ratsey gave me a peep in, and old Guy's coffin had cracks and warps in it, and looked as if a sound blow would send it to pieces. Yet here were the Mohune coffins that had been put away for generations, and must be rotten as tinder, tapping against one another with a sound like a drum, as if they were still sound and airtight. Still, Mr. Glennie must be right, for if it was not the coffins, then what should it be that made that noise? So on the next day after we heard the sounds in the church, being the Monday as soon as morning school was over, off I ran down the street and across meadows to the churchyard, meaning to listen outside the church if the Mohunes were still moving. I say outside the church, for I knew Ratsey would not lend me the key to go in after what he had said about boys prying into things that did not concern them, and besides that, I do not know that I should care to have ventured inside alone, even if I had the key. When I reached the church, not a little out of breath, I listened first on the side nearest the village, that is, the north side, putting my ear against the wall, and afterwards lying down on the ground, though the grass was long and wet, so that I might better catch any sound that came, but I could hear nothing, and so concluded that the Mohunes had come to rest again, yet thought I would walk round the church and listen to it on the south or seaside, for that their worships might have drifted over to that side, and be there rubbing shoulders with one another. So I went round and was glad to get out of the cold shade into the sun on the south, but here was the surprise, for when I come round the great buttress which juts out from the wall, what should I see but two men, and these two were Ratsey and Elzevir Block. I came upon them unawares, and lo and behold, There was Master Ratsey lying also on the ground with his ear to the wall, while Elzevir sat back against the inside of the buttress with a spyglass in his hands, smoking and looking out to sea. Now I had as much right to be in the churchyard as Ratsey or Elzevir, yet I felt a sudden shame, as if I had been caught in some bad act, and knew the blood was running to my cheeks. At first I had it in my mind to turn tail and make off, but concluded to stand my ground, since they had seen me, and so bade them good morning. Mr. Ratsey jumped to his feet as nimbly as a cat, and if he had not been a man, I should have thought he was blushing too, for his face was very red, though that came perhaps from lying on the ground. I could see he was a little put about and out of countenance, though he tried to say "Good morning, John," in an easy tone, as if it were a common thing for him to be lying in the churchyard with his ear to the wall. And on winter's morning, "Good morning, John," he said, "and what might you be doing in the churchyard this fine day?" I answered that I came to listen if the Mohuns were still moving. "Well, that I can't tell you," returned Ramsay, not wishing to waste thought on such idle matters, and having to examine this wall whether the floods have not so damaged it as to need underpinnings. "So if you have time to get about of a morning, get you back to my workshop and fetch me a plasterer's hammer which I have left behind, so I can try this mortar." I knew that he was making excuses about underpinning, for the wall was sound as rock, but I was glad enough to take him at his word and beat a retreat from where I was not wanted. Indeed, I soon saw how he was mocking me, for the men did not even wait for me to come back with a hammer, but I met them returning in the first meadow. Master Ratsey made another excuse that he did not need the hammer now, as he had found out that all that was wanted was a little pointing with a new mortar. "But if you have such time to waste, John," he added, "you can come tomorrow and help me to get new thwarts in the patrol, which she badly wants." So we three came back to the village together, but looking up Elzevir once while Master Ratsey was making these pretences, I saw his eyes twinkle under their heavy brow, as if he were amused at the other's embarrassment. The next Sunday, when we went out to the church, all was quiet as usual. There was no Elzevir, no more noises, and I never heard the Mohuns move again. Hey guys, and thank you for listening today. Unfortunately there won't be a chapter 3 or 4 until tomorrow, but rest assured there will be. This book is indeed so long that I need to do it in parts, but at the end, once I've finished all 19 chapters, I will compile everything together into a single video so that you can listen to it as one contiguous piece. Hopefully it sounds alright like that, although I'm still learning to keep a single voice for all my videos, but we'll get there. Alright, well thank you for listening otherwise, and I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, if you could maybe think about subscribing and leaving a comment and a like. And other than that, I hope you have a fantastic day. Farewell for now.